Dylan Mercer had been in apartment 4B for 3 days when the man across the hall knocked on his door at 9:38 on a Thursday night. He was still surrounded by half-open boxes, one lamp with no shade, and a metal shelving unit he had assembled backward twice before giving up. He had just come off a 12-hour shift in the emergency department at Harbor Memorial and was eating cold noodles over the sink when the knock came again, careful but urgent. Dylan opened the door and found Cameron Hayes standing under the hallway light in dark station pants and a faded navy t-shirt. Cameron was 35, broad through the shoulders, built like someone who spent more time carrying equipment than talking about exercise, and usually moved with the controlled certainty Dylan had noticed the 2 times they had crossed paths near the elevator. Tonight that certainty was gone. One hand held a pharmacy slip. The other rested on the shoulder of a small boy wrapped in a gray blanket printed with rockets. "I'm sorry," Cameron said. "You said you were a nurse, right?" Dylan's tiredness disappeared. "ER. What happened?" Cameron glanced toward his apartment. "Leo has a fever. His pediatrician called in an antibiotic because his ear got worse after school. The pharmacy screwed up the order and says they'll hold the counter open for 25 minutes. My backup sitter isn't answering. I can carry him there, but he finally fell asleep." He stopped, jaw tightening as if asking the next question physically hurt. "Would you sit with him in my place while I run down the block? I know this is a ridiculous thing to ask a neighbor I barely know." Dylan looked past him. Through Cameron's open door, he could see a child-sized backpack on the floor, a red plastic fire engine beneath a chair, and a glass of water beside the couch. "It would be ridiculous if you asked me to take him to Vegas," Dylan said. 25 minutes is manageable." Cameron stared at him for half a second before relief loosened his face. "Thank you. Show me where the thermometer is." Leo Hayes was 7, small for his age, and deeply offended by the existence of cherry-flavored medicine even while half asleep. Dylan sat on Cameron's couch with the boy curled under his blanket and checked his temperature without waking him fully. The apartment was clean in the uneven way of a home run by one busy parent. Counters wiped down, laundry folded but still in a basket, a school permission slip held to the refrigerator by a magnet from the Boston Fire Museum. On a shelf beside the television stood a framed photograph of Cameron with a dark-haired woman and a much younger Leo between them. Dylan did not need an explanation. Cameron had mentioned during one of their hallway conversations that he was a single father, but not how he had become one. 18 minutes later the lock turned. Cameron came in breathing hard, a paper bag in one hand and rain on his shoulders. He did not ask Dylan whether the apartment was all right or whether anything had gone wrong. He went straight to the couch, dropped to one knee, and pressed the back of 2 fingers to Leo's cheek. "Hey, buddy." Leo made a small sound and reached for him without opening his eyes. Cameron's entire face changed. The man who looked capable of ordering a fire crew through a collapsing building softened so completely that Dylan had to look away for a second. "Temperature is down from 101.8 to 101.3, Dylan said. He drank some water. No vomiting, no breathing trouble. Cameron glanced up. "You wrote it down?" Dylan pointed to a sticky note on the coffee table. "Occupational habit." Cameron let out a quiet laugh. "I owe you. You owe me nothing. But your kid has a strong opinion about cherry flavor. He inherited that from me. Then your judgment as a parent is officially questionable." Cameron smiled for real this time. It was brief, tired, and unexpectedly attractive. Dylan told himself he noticed because he had spent all day around sick people and his standards were temporarily compromised. At 8 the next morning, Dylan opened his door to find a cardboard drink carrier and 2 breakfast sandwiches balanced in Cameron's hands. Leo stood beside him wearing a school uniform polo and looking completely recovered, though a small adhesive bandage on his arm suggested Cameron had taken the pediatrician's advice about a follow-up visit seriously. "Payment," Cameron said. "You said I owed you nothing, so technically this is not repayment." Dylan took one coffee. That argument would not survive cross-examination. Leo peered past him into the apartment. "Your shelf is crooked." Dylan looked over his shoulder. "I'm aware." Cameron leaned slightly to see it. "That bracket is upside down." "I'm aware of that too. You work in an emergency room. Human bodies have clearer instructions than flat-pack furniture." Cameron set the sandwiches on the counter, walked to the shelf, and held out a hand. Screwdriver. Dylan stared at him. You came here to say thank you. And now I'm preventing blunt force trauma when that thing falls on you. 10 minutes later, Cameron had the brackets reversed and the shelf level while Dylan stood beside him pretending not to watch the flex of his forearms whenever he tightened a screw. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor building a small robot from magnetic pieces he had brought over. Dad fixes everything, Leo said. Cameron snorted. That is absolutely not true. Almost everything. Dylan handed Cameron the last screw. Good. I'll keep a list. Cameron's eyes met his. You planning to break a lot of things? Depends how long you keep bringing coffee. The line landed between them with more weight than Dylan intended. Cameron's mouth twitched, and for 1 second neither of them looked away. Then Leo announced that his robot needed a launch pad, and the moment dissolved before either man had to decide what it meant. The next 10 days settled into small overlaps. Cameron left before sunrise on 24-hour shifts at Station 18. Dylan sometimes came home after midnight with the elastic marks of a mask still pressed into his face. A coffee appeared outside Dylan's door one morning after Cameron heard him leave for a brutal double shift. 2 nights later, Dylan left a container of pasta outside Cameron's door after hearing Leo complain that his father had burned dinner again. Leo stopped treating apartment 4B as foreign territory. He knocked to show Dylan a cardboard Mars rover, a paper volcano, and one badly drawn diagram of a robot doctor that apparently had 6 arms because real doctors need more hands. Dylan corrected him every time. Nurse. Leo would nod solemnly, and then call it a doctor again. Cameron never simply sent the boy across the hall and disappeared. If Leo was in Dylan's apartment, Cameron was usually there too, leaning against the counter with a mug, talking about a station inspection or listening while Dylan complained about an attending physician who treated every patient complaint like a personal attack. Dylan learned Cameron hated olives, slept badly after major calls, and could make a 7-year-old put away toys with one raised eyebrow. Cameron learned Dylan had moved from Philadelphia for a senior ER position, hated sweet coffee, and had no patience for people who used the phrase, everything happens for a reason. None of those facts were important by themselves. Together, they started taking up space in both men's routines. On the second Saturday after the fever, Leo appeared at Dylan's door in a red Station 18 cap. We have open house today. Dylan looked at Cameron standing behind him. Apparently, I have been summoned. Cameron rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. You don't have to come. He invited half the building. 4 people, Leo corrected. Mrs. Kim has yoga. Mr. Frank said crowds make him angry. So you should come. Dylan looked at Cameron instead of the boy. Do you want me there? Cameron had an easy answer available. He could have said Leo did, or that more people were always welcome. Instead, he paused. Yeah, he said. I do. Dylan felt the simple answer somewhere lower than he expected. Then I'll come. Leo pumped one fist like he had negotiated an international treaty. Cameron gave Dylan a look that said he knew exactly how badly both of them had been manipulated, but the smile he wore as they headed for the elevator made it clear he did not mind. Station 18 was louder and brighter than Dylan expected, full of children climbing through parked engines, firefighters giving equipment demonstrations, and families moving between folding tables covered with helmets, stickers, and safety pamphlets. Dylan had seen Cameron in a worn t-shirt, half awake over coffee, and kneeling beside a sick child. He had not seen Captain Hayes in uniform. Cameron moved through the station with a clipped focus that made everyone around him adjust without being asked. He checked a ladder demonstration, redirected a rookie who had left a tool where a child could reach it, and answered 3 questions at once without losing track of Leo. When an alarm test made one younger child cry, Cameron crouched beside him, took off his helmet, and let the boy touch it until he stopped shaking. Dylan watched from 10 feet away and understood why Cameron's crew listened when he spoke. You must be Dylan. A firefighter with a shaved head handed him a bottle of water. I'm Marcus. Hayes has mentioned you. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Across the bay, Cameron looked over immediately, as if his name had traveled through the air. Has he? Marcus grinned. Mostly about coffee and the shelf you almost killed yourself with. Cameron reached them. Ignore him. I was going to ask how long you two have been dating, Marcus said. Cameron choked on his water. Dylan laughed before he could stop himself. We're not, right? Cameron said too quickly. Marcus looked from one to the other with open amusement and walked away. Leo, thankfully, was busy testing the horn in a parked engine. Cameron kept his eyes on him. Sorry. Dylan studied the side of his face. For what? Marcus. I've survived worse questions. Cameron finally looked at him. Would it bother you if people thought that? Dylan took a slow drink of water. Would it bother you? Cameron opened his mouth. No answer came. A call bell sounded from the front desk and saved him. He excused himself, but Dylan caught the way Cameron looked back once before disappearing toward the office. 2 weeks later, Leo's school held a science night on the same evening. Station 18 responded to a warehouse fire. Cameron called Dylan at 6:23, his voice clipped under background sirens. I hate asking again. Dylan was already changing out of scrubs. Then don't waste time hating it. Leo's presentation starts at 7. Mrs. Alvarez can get him there, but she has to leave by 7:15. I don't know when we'll clear. Dylan looked at the clock. Text me the school address. Dylan, go do your job. The line went quiet for a beat. Thank you. Dylan arrived as Leo was arranging a homemade flood warning sensor on a cafeteria table. He spent 40 minutes holding tape, finding an extension cord, and stopping Leo from explaining the entire electrical system to every adult who walked past. Cameron came through the gym doors at 8:11 in station trousers and a clean black shirt, hair still damp from a fast shower at the station. He stopped just inside the room. Dylan followed his gaze and realized what Cameron saw. Leo in the center, excited and talking with both hands. Dylan beside him, wearing Leo's visitor badge because the boy had insisted. 2 empty paper cups and a half-eaten cookie on the table like evidence of a long evening together. Cameron's expression changed so subtly most people would have missed it. Dylan did not. Relief came first. Something warmer followed. Leo spotted him and launched himself across the room. Cameron caught him, lifted him once, and immediately asked about the project. He listened to every word. Later, after Leo won a small ribbon for Best Practical Design, Cameron stood beside Dylan in the parking lot while the boy ran circles around a light pole. You didn't have to do this, Cameron said. Dylan glanced at him. I know. Cameron nodded as if that answer mattered more. That night, Cameron invited Dylan in for one drink after Leo went to bed. They sat on the narrow balcony with the city glowing beyond the apartment complex and a small space heater between their chairs. Cameron had changed into sweatpants and a gray t-shirt. Dylan had showered after work, but still felt the fatigue of the hospital in his shoulders. For a while they talked about easy things. The science ribbon, Marcus's bad jokes, the fact that Leo had somehow eaten 3 cookies without either adult noticing. Then Cameron went quiet. Olivia would have liked you, he said. Dylan did not move. Cameron looked through the balcony railing instead of at him. Leo's mom. She died 3 years ago. A cerebral aneurysm. She was 31. Dylan kept his voice level. I'm sorry. I hate that sentence. Cameron gave a short laugh. Not when you say it. Just in general. People say it, and then look at me like I'm supposed to make them feel better for bringing it up. I'm not going to make you do that. Cameron turned the glass between his hands. After she died, everybody wanted to help. Her parents. My crew. Neighbors. I said no to almost all of it because if I could still get Leo to school, still work, still keep the apartment running, then maybe I wasn't failing him. Dylan watched his thumb drag over the condensation. Being capable and being alone aren't the same thing. Cameron looked at him then. You say that like you know. I work 12-hour shifts in a room full of people who think asking for help is the thing that proves they're weak. I know. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Cameron's knee brushed Dylan's once beneath the small table, and neither moved immediately. When Dylan finally stood to leave, he stepped backward onto a plastic rover Leo had abandoned near the balcony door. His foot rolled. Cameron caught him by the waist before he hit the frame. Dylan's palm landed flat against Cameron's chest. For a second they were pressed close enough that Dylan could feel the heat through Cameron's shirt and the quick expansion of his breath. Cameron's hand stayed at his waist. Not gripping. Not moving either. Dylan looked down at it, then back at Cameron. Cameron's eyes dropped to his mouth. The shift was small and impossible to mistake. Dylan did not step away. Cameron leaned forward a fraction, stopped and swallowed. Then his hand loosened. "You okay?" he asked, voice rougher than before. Dylan let his own hand fall from Cameron's chest. Perfectly, Cameron opened the door for him. Dylan crossed the hall, without looking back until he reached his own lock. When he turned, Cameron was still standing in his doorway. Neither man smiled. Neither said goodnight. The air between the two apartments had changed too much for ordinary words. The next evening, Dylan came home to a silver sedan in the visitor lot, and an older man standing with Cameron near the front steps. The man wore a dark wool coat despite the mild weather, and held a folder under one arm. Cameron's shoulders were rigid. "I'm not questioning whether you love him," the man said. "I'm questioning whether love is enough when your schedule changes every week." Cameron saw Dylan and ended the conversation with a tight nod. The older man left without acknowledging him. Cameron did not explain until 2 days later, when Dylan found him sitting alone on the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors because Leo was asleep and Cameron apparently needed a place that was not his own kitchen. "Martin Shaw," Cameron said. "Olivia's father." Dylan sat one step below him. "He thinks you're unstable? He thinks my life is—" Cameron rubbed both hands over his face. "My regular after-school sitter moved. The backup canceled twice this month. I had to swap a shift last week. Martin wants Leo at their place Monday through Thursday. Better school district, predictable evenings, a yard, grandparents who don't get called into burning buildings. And you?" "I think my son lives with me." The answer came hard. Then Cameron's anger weakened. "But what if he's right about the rest?" Dylan did not tell him what he wanted to hear. "Then fix the rest." Cameron looked at him. "That's it. If your childcare system is bad, build a better one. That doesn't mean hand over 4 days of your kid's week, because someone made you feel guilty." Cameron stared down the stairs. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple. It is specific. Those are different things." Martin's words got under Cameron's skin anyway. Over the next week, he stopped knocking on Dylan's door. The morning coffee disappeared. Wednesday dinner did not happen. When Dylan saw him in the hallway, Cameron was polite and busy, always carrying something, always on his way somewhere. Leo still waved and talked, but Cameron kept the conversations moving. Dylan gave him 4 days before cornering him near the mailboxes. "Did I do something?" Cameron's head came up. "No, then stop treating me like I did. I'm trying to get things under control." "By disappearing?" Cameron lowered his voice. "Martin thinks I'm depending on people I barely know to raise my kid." Dylan's temper sharpened. "And you decided the solution was to turn me into evidence for his argument?" "That's not what I meant. You don't get to decide I'm part of the problem because you're embarrassed you needed help." Cameron's jaw tightened. "I'm not embarrassed." "Then what are you?" The question hit. Cameron looked away. Dylan stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "I like Leo. I like helping when I choose to help, but I am not your automatic babysitter, and I am not a substitute parent you can either lean on or push away depending on how guilty you feel. If you need space, take it. Just be honest about why." Cameron's face lost some of its defense. "You're right. I know." Dylan turned toward the stairs. Cameron caught his name before he left. "Dylan." He stopped. "I missed the coffee." Dylan looked back. "Then stop being an idiot." It was not forgiveness, but Cameron laughed despite himself. 3 mornings later, Cameron knocked on Dylan's door at 6:45. He looked worse than he had the first night they met. Leo sat on the hallway floor beside him in pajamas, wrapped in a blanket and glaring at the world with fever-bright eyes. Dylan opened the door wider. Cameron spoke before he could ask. 100.8. No trouble breathing. He says his throat hurts. Pediatrician thinks viral. I called out, but I have a command review at 9 about the warehouse rescue. I'm the lead officer. If I don't attend, the whole crew's review gets delayed. Mrs. Alvarez is with her daughter in Providence. My backup has flu. Every sentence sounded like a defense. Dylan folded his arms. How long? Cameron's eyes met his. 3 hours. For maximum. Bring his medicine log. Cameron did not move. Dylan, after what you said, what I said was don't treat me like your child care plan. I didn't say never ask me for help. The tension in Cameron's shoulders broke all at once. Dylan crouched in front of Leo. Still hate cherry medicine? Leo nodded miserably. Good. Your standard survived. Cameron handed over the medication and crouched beside his son. He explained where he was going, when he would be back, and that Dylan was staying with him. Leo nodded and leaned forward into Cameron's chest. Cameron held him longer than necessary. Dylan looked away, giving them the privacy of a few feet. The review ran long. Cameron returned at 11:52 expecting cartoons, complaints, or Leo demanding lunch. The apartment was quiet. Leo slept on the couch under his rocket blanket. On the coffee table sat a thermometer, a glass with a straw, and a sheet of paper with times written in Dylan's compact handwriting. Dylan was asleep on the rug with his back against the couch, one arm folded over his stomach. He had come off a night shift at 5:30 and never mentioned it. Cameron stood in the doorway with his keys still in his hand. Nothing about the scene was dramatic. No one was waiting to praise him. No emergency needed solving. His son was safe. Dylan was exhausted, and Cameron wanted, with sudden painful clarity, to walk over and put his hand on the back of Dylan's neck just because he could. He wanted him at the station open house when Leo was healthy. He wanted him on the balcony after a normal day. He wanted the smart mouth, the black coffee, the way Dylan did not soften the truth to make him comfortable. He had been telling himself that Dylan mattered because Dylan made hard days easier. Standing there in a quiet room where the hard part was already over, Cameron understood the lie. Dylan mattered when nothing was wrong. Dylan woke 20 minutes later to the smell of coffee. Cameron stood at the kitchen counter with 2 mugs. That better not have sugar in it, Dylan said. I learned. Slowly. Cameron set a mug down. Leo was still asleep. Dylan checked the clock, then Cameron's face. How did the review go? Fine. Cameron leaned both hands on the counter. I need to say something before I talk myself out of it. Dylan became still. Cameron did not pace or look away. I kept telling myself I was drawn to you, because you helped when everything was bad. Leo's sick. My schedule a mess. Martin pushing. It made sense. Dylan waited. Then today I came home, and everything was fine. Leo was safe. The review was over. There was nothing I needed you to fix. Cameron's throat moved. And I wanted you here anyway. Dylan's pulse jumped, but he kept his voice steady. Wanting company is not the same as wanting me. I know. Cameron stepped around the counter. I thought about that too. He stopped close enough that Dylan had to lift his chin slightly. I miss you when you're not around. I notice when you're tired. I know what your footsteps sound like in the hall. I almost kissed you on my balcony and spent a week pretending I didn't. Dylan's mouth went dry. That last part was especially stupid. Very. Cameron's hand lifted, then stopped before touching him. Can I kiss you? Dylan looked at him for one long second. Yes. Cameron touched Dylan's jaw first, thumb resting just below his cheekbone, and leaned in slowly enough that Dylan could have changed his mind. The first kiss was warm and controlled, a careful press of mouths that lasted only a few seconds. Cameron pulled back just enough to look at him, breathing harder than the kiss justified. Dylan grabbed the front of Cameron's shirt and pulled him back. The second kiss lost the caution. Cameron's hand moved to Dylan's waist and brought their bodies together while Dylan slid one hand behind his neck. Cameron kissed him deeper, then paused against his mouth, as if checking the reaction without asking. Dylan answered by tightening his grip. Heat moved fast after weeks of pretending there was nothing between them. Cameron backed Dylan one step until his hip touched the counter, his palm firm at Dylan's side, and Dylan felt exactly how much effort Cameron was using not to rush. He broke the kiss before either of them forgot where Leo was sleeping. Their foreheads touched. That, Dylan said quietly, was not gratitude. Cameron laughed once, breathless. No, Dylan's hand stayed at the back of his neck. Listen to me. I will not become the answer to whether you're a good father. I won't let you make me responsible for proving your life works. Cameron's expression sobered. You're not. And I'm not stepping into Olivia's place. I would never ask you to. Cameron's thumb moved once against Dylan's waist. You're the man I want. That has nothing to do with replacing anyone. Dylan studied him. Then deal with Martin yourself. Cameron nodded. I will. Dylan let him go first. Cameron spent the next 4 days doing exactly that. He called the station scheduling officer and moved from an inconsistent rotating pattern to a stable block schedule available to senior captains. He registered Leo for the after-school program at his school instead of relying on a single sitter. He hired a licensed backup caregiver through a service used by several firefighters with children and put Martin and Leo's grandmother on the emergency list with fixed days that did not depend on Cameron being in crisis. None of it was romantic. It involved forms, fees, 2 uncomfortable phone calls, and 1 meeting with a school administrator who talked for 20 minutes about authorized pickup procedures. Dylan was not part of the plan. Cameron deliberately kept him out of it. When Martin arrived Sunday afternoon, Cameron placed the printed schedule on the dining table. This is what I'm changing, he said. Martin read it twice. And when the station changes your hours again, then I adjust the system. I don't move my son out 4 nights a week. Martin's mouth tightened. You're acting like I'm trying to take him. You're trying to make your fear the structure of his life. The older man looked up sharply. Cameron did not soften. You were right that my childcare was inconsistent. I fixed it. You were wrong that the answer was making Leo live somewhere else most of the week. Martin's gaze shifted toward the framed photograph of Olivia on the shelf. And the neighbor? Dylan. Dylan. Martin folded his hands. Where does he fit into this system? Cameron's answer came without hesitation. He doesn't. He fits into my life because I want him there. He is not childcare. Martin sat back. For the first time since the conflict began, his anger looked more like exhaustion. Do you know what happens when Leo talks about him? He asked. Cameron said nothing. He lights up. The way Olivia used to when she talked about you. Martin looked at the photograph. I told myself I was worried about school and schedules. I am worried about those things. But I'm also watching him build a life that keeps moving farther from the last version of my daughter I can still touch. Cameron's anger left him. Leo loving Dylan does not make him love Olivia less. I know that in my head. Martin's voice roughened. The rest of me has been slower. Cameron sat across from him. There's a picture of her in his room. He tells stories about her. You and Diane are his grandparents. None of that changes if my life changes. Martin looked at him for a long time. Is it serious? Cameron thought of the kitchen, Dylan's hand in his shirt. The way he had stopped the kiss to protect a boundary instead of using the moment to get closer. Yes, you've been dating for 4 days. We've been building something longer than that. Martin almost smiled. That sounds annoyingly reasonable. I've had practice. They did not solve everything in one conversation. Martin still disliked the 24-hour shifts. Cameron still disliked being questioned about his parenting. But by the time Martin left, they had agreed on 2 regular afternoons each week for Leo with his grandparents and no weekday relocation. It was not surrender. It was a plan. Cameron waited until 7 that evening to cross the hallway. Leo was spending the night with Martin and Diane, his first planned overnight in months rather than an emergency arrangement. Dylan opened the door in a black t-shirt and soft gray pants, one hand still holding a fork. Leo okay? He asked immediately. He's fine. Dylan glanced behind Cameron. Station problem? No. Then what do you need? Cameron stepped closer. Nothing. Dylan's eyebrows lifted. That's new. I came over because I wanted to see you. The teasing left Dylan's face. Cameron continued before nerves could turn him stupid. Martin and I worked it out. Not perfectly. But Leo stays with me. The schedule is fixed, and you are not on my childcare plan. Romantic. I thought you'd appreciate it. Dylan set the fork on a side table. I do. Cameron looked into the apartment. Can I come in? Dylan moved aside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Cameron did not kiss him immediately. He waited until Dylan faced him again. I also told Martin about us. Us. I used the word on purpose. Dylan stared at him. You move fast for a man who took 3 weeks to touch my waist. Cameron smiled. I'm trying to improve my response time. Dylan grabbed the front of his shirt. Then improve it. The kiss started hard because neither of them had a reason to pretend anymore. Dylan pulled Cameron down and Cameron caught him at the waist, one arm wrapping fully around his back. Dylan's mouth opened under his, warm and demanding, and Cameron answered without hesitation. He kissed along Dylan's jaw when they broke for air, then stopped at his neck long enough to make Dylan's fingers tighten against his shoulders. Dylan pushed Cameron's jacket off. Cameron tugged Dylan's t-shirt up only after Dylan lifted his arms, then let his palms settle at Dylan's bare waist. Dylan laughed softly when Cameron stared. "Captain, you're supposed to be good under pressure. Not this kind. That is painfully obvious." Cameron kissed him again, slower this time, hands moving over Dylan's back and shoulders without rushing. Dylan pulled Cameron's shirt over his head and ran both hands across his chest, as if finally confirming what he had been trying not to notice for weeks. They moved to the couch, still kissing, Dylan settling across Cameron's lap while Cameron held him securely at the hips. The heat was real, but so was the pause when Cameron looked at him and asked, "Still good?" Dylan answered by kissing him once, then said, "Very." Cameron smiled against his mouth. Clothes were left in a loose trail toward the bedroom, but neither man treated the night like a test or a rescue. There was no argument to win, no identity to prove, and no crisis waiting on the other side of the door. They took their time, stayed close, and let the rest remain private. Later, Dylan lay with his head against Cameron's shoulder, both of them quiet and exhausted. "You know," Dylan said, "for someone who saves people for a living, you are terrible at asking for what you want." Cameron turned his head. "I asked tonight. Eventually. I'm learning." Dylan kissed his shoulder. "Keep learning." Dylan woke the next morning to cupboard doors opening and closing in his kitchen. He pulled on a t-shirt and found Cameron standing shirtless in front of the coffee machine with the expression he normally wore when inspecting damaged equipment. "What did it do to you?" Dylan asked. Cameron did not look away from the buttons. "It has 6 settings. Coffee needs 1 setting. You command an entire fire station. People make sense. You literally run into burning buildings. Fire makes sense." Dylan reached around him and pressed one button. The machine started. Cameron looked offended. "That's all. I'm an emergency nurse. I handle complicated machinery." Cameron caught him around the waist before he could move away. Dylan expected a joke. Instead, Cameron kissed him, unhurried and certain. There was no hesitation in the morning light, no glance toward the door, no retreat after the fact. When the machine beeped, Cameron did not let go immediately. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. Dylan smiled. "A second date already? Was last night the first?" "Absolutely not. You didn't even feed me. I came over while you were eating. Your planning needs work." Cameron kissed him again. Seven. The answer felt simple because nothing around it needed to be. The relationship did not turn Dylan into Leo's second parent overnight. Cameron refused to let that happen, and Dylan would not have allowed it anyway. For the first month, they dated mostly when Leo was with his grandparents or when schedules gave them a free lunch. Dylan still worked nights. Cameron still had station emergencies. Leo still knocked on Dylan's door whenever he had a new project, but now Cameron sometimes stood behind him and stole a kiss in the hallway after checking that the boy was looking the other way. When Cameron had a bad call, he did not automatically show up at Dylan's door expecting to be fixed. He sent a text. "Rough one. Can I come over?" Dylan usually answered yes. When Dylan came home furious after losing a patient despite 30 minutes of resuscitation, he found Cameron sitting on the floor outside his apartment with 2 coffees. "You could have gone inside," Dylan said. Cameron shook his head. "You didn't invite me yet." Dylan unlocked the door. "Come in." That difference mattered. Help became something offered and accepted, not assumed. 8 months after the first fever, 3 cardboard boxes sat in the hallway again. This time they were not Dylan's old moving boxes. They were new, labeled kitchen, LEO books, and things Cameron refuses to throw away. Dylan stood outside apartment 4B with a marker in his hand while Cameron carried the last box toward the elevator. "Those are fire service journals," Cameron said. "They're from 2009. History matters." So, does recycling. Leo came out of Cameron's apartment holding a handmade wooden sign painted in uneven blue letters. They were moving into a rented townhouse 10 minutes from Leo's school, 12 from Harbor Memorial, and close enough to Station 18 that Cameron's commute barely changed. No one was knocking down apartment walls. No one was pretending the old place had to disappear for the new one to matter. Olivia's photographs were packed beside Cameron's family albums. Martin and Diane already had keys to the townhouse because they picked Leo up every Tuesday and Thursday. Dylan had his own office. Cameron had agreed, under protest, that the garage would not become storage for broken furniture he might fix someday. At the townhouse, Leo refused to unpack anything until the sign was mounted beside the kitchen. It read Hayes Mercer House Rules. Beneath the title were 3 lines in Leo's handwriting. N.O. burned dinner. Friday, movie night. Nobody handles hard things alone. Dylan read the last one twice, then looked at Cameron. That rule is aimed at you. Cameron set down the drill. I have made significant progress. You asked me to help carry exactly 0 boxes today. I am a firefighter. You almost dropped the microwave. That was tactical. Leo groaned loudly. Can you both stop talking and hang it up? Cameron laughed and drilled the first screw into the wall while Dylan held the sign level. Leo stood between them, giving unnecessary instructions. When it was finally straight, he stepped back with both hands on his hips. Good. Cameron looked from the sign to Dylan. 8 months earlier, he had stood outside a neighbor's door convinced that asking for 25 minutes of help meant he had failed at something. Now his son was arguing about where to put board games in a home they had chosen together. His father-in-law was bringing dinner in an hour, and Dylan was close enough that Cameron could reach for him without fear that the gesture meant weakness. He did. Dylan let himself be pulled in, shoulder against Cameron's chest. You still owe me for that first night, Dylan said. Cameron frowned. You said I owed you nothing. I changed my mind. What do you want? Dylan looked toward Leo, who was already dragging books out of a box. Then he looked back at Cameron. Coffee tomorrow morning. Black. No sugar. Cameron smiled. That I can do. Dylan raised an eyebrow. You still need supervision with the machine? Cameron kissed his temple. Then I guess you'll have to stay. Dylan leaned into him just enough to make the answer obvious. Across the room, Leo held up a book and demanded to know where the space shelf was going. Cameron let Dylan go and reached for the box. Nobody in the room called the moment perfect. It was better than that. It was ordinary, chosen, and sometimes the family meant for us does not arrive in the way we imagined. Sometimes it begins with a knock on the door, one small act of trust, and the courage to let someone stay. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing this story with Cameron, Dylan, and Leo. If you enjoyed their journey, I truly appreciate your support, your comments, and every moment you spend here with these stories. I hope to see you again in the next one.